For Africa, the transition really has to be least cost. It can't just be focused on the rapid decarbonization.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots podcast. I remain your host, Emeka Opopara. Today, we'll discuss responsible mining, energy transition, and everything in between. According to the World Economic Forum, the global transition to green economies demand around 3 billion tons of metals. Africa's significant mineral resources position her as a critical driver in this transition. However, poorly managed projects can exacerbate conflict and human rights issues. Hence, we must foster sustainable and responsible practices to ensure a successful and equitable green transition. Joining us to discuss this today is Jabri Ibrahim. Jabri is the Africa Special Programs Lead for the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion, where he spearheads the Clean Power Program and develops initiatives focused on energy transition in Africa. Please join me in welcoming Jabri to the podcast. Welcome, Jabri. How are you doing today?
Hi, Emeka. Thank you so much for having me and creating the time for me. I'm doing good.
Excellent. So, Jabri, this conversation is one that we've been having in Nigeria in different pockets, because in Nigeria, there's been a massive flood, and if I may use that word, around lithium mining. And that has happened over the past few years, and it's currently happening. And the price of lithium in Nigeria has progressively jumped over time. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts around the green metals for energy transition. As the Africa Special Programs Lead in the UN High-Level Climate Champions, you're leading the efforts which address the dual need to expand affordable energy in developing economies and build a global decarbonized energy system. How would you assess Africa's efforts in the transition to cleaner energy systems?
Yeah, so I just want to kind of set the scene. And if, for the listeners of this podcast, I want them to be able to hold conflicting truths or conflicting facts about this discussion we're having, because there are many facts that can be seen to be conflicting, but they are kind of reinforcing. So, for example, for Africa to achieve all its climate goals and needs by the 2030 targets, as outlined in the Paris Agreement, Africa needs $2.4 trillion between now and 2030. And off of that, since the Paris Agreement came into force, only 12% has been realized. And the discussion around this and the cost of capital and other macroeconomic realities that Africa faces leads us to have a discussion that maybe some might say Africa is not ready for, because Africa's energy transition does not always reflect Africa's urgent priority of the African people. So, for example, the discussion around transition is the nomenclature of that is like from what to what. Most Africans don't have access to electricity or any even coal electricity. Not most African, but 800 million approximate latest numbers, and about 900 million to 1 billion don't have access to clean cooking technologies. So that I just want to frame that for Africa, the transition really has to be least cost. It can't just be focused on the rapid decarbonization, but it has to be put on a least cost pathway to net zero, meaning Africa can't foot the bill of a transition to renewables if it's not actually affordable. And solar is increasingly the cheapest way of generating electricity, but also solar, if you add the cost of batteries to store it, it is true the sun doesn't always shine, then the cost can be super prohibitive. And then if you add that cost of capital, because investors are scared of Africa, then it becomes an even bigger barrier. So I just wanted to set the scene with this fact, and that
No, that was good.
Yeah, the discussion is not just on emissions. but on access and on development.
That's a really good point you bring up because, for instance, most African countries have an abundance of some material or some minerals
Yeah.
that have been deemed dirty, like coal. We
Mhm.
have our some countries who are still processing or accessing energy, generating it through coal, and getting financing for coal has been a bit tricky. But it's that conversation of what's least cost. And I know there's some instances where coal is not least cost, but there's been parts of the world where that's the easiest and most affordable way to get power. So I understand the transition away from fossil fuels, but sometimes countries are making decisions because some of our European counterparts are able to move forward with coal as their generating sources. So I think it's just really a scenario where countries have to look at it and figure out what is best for them.
Yeah, agreed.
So looking at where we are with where your team is with being a high level climate champion, what are the projected increases for demand for clean energy technology as solar panels and batteries, which rely heavily on mineral resources like lithium and cobalt? Do you believe the mining industry in Africa is poised to meet this demand?
It is true. And I often joke and I tell my friends, if you are in the investment game and you're buying stocks in, huge multinational conglomerates or companies, then you should look at this company called the Metals Group. So all projections, and I don't want to go into the numbers because we're just having a discussion, but if your listeners want to look at the numbers, go look at the market outlook at the International Energy Agency. So you'll have all the numbers, and that's the latest. And all investors look at the IAA numbers. So, it's really important we all look at the same numbers. But all projections, everyone agrees, anyone who's analyzing the demand and the non-supplies as we're doing more geological surveys agrees that this demand will only go higher. The minerals and the metals needed to develop clean energy technologies, batteries for your electric vehicle, batteries that are grid scale batteries, gigawatt scale batteries, wind technology, right? PVs, electrolyzers for hydrogen. All of them need, as we call them, energy transition critical minerals. So I think there's full consensus between the geologists, the investors, the climate folks, the energy folks. This demand will only go higher between now and 2030, 2050. And it's fine. All countries should be forward facing. So you are looking at the least cost of electricity generation now, and some countries have to really look at it increasingly as a priority, like South Africa. But also, South Africa has the best wind potential in the continent. It has some of the best sun. And the blueprint has been done, and I know countries like the UK have emitted the most historic emissions, but the UK has been able to generate a huge majority of its electricity mix from offshore wind. And look at it's I think at 1% of their grid is coal. So it can be done, and it has been done. And if you are a country and you look at these projections, coal will only be more expensive. And if you're trying to get World Bank to finance, or Africa Development Bank, or any other multilateral bank, then this is the cheapest money countries can get, or the cheapest loans in debt. You can't get it from them. So you have to go to a Chinese, maybe private investor. And China isn't even investing in coal now. So you have to go to a really expensive loan shark. And is it worth, is it worth these short-term wins if then you're stranded with a very expensive way of generating electricity in the future? And countries should look at that. But two things on that, and my organization has been looking at this, is that first, and we're developing a paper that just looks at how Africa can localize this value chain of the energy transition minerals and metals. So at least that we can develop some of these technologies in-house or in situ before just exporting, raw materials again. And if it's batteries for, if it's lithium for batteries, then we can, at least do like some sort of manufacturing of battery precursors or whatever it is, and then export like a value added product so that, we even reduce emissions if we do some of the manufacturing in Africa. So that's what I'm hopeful to see. There are many players in the space. The Americans are here. The EU is signing bilateral deals, most recently with Rwanda. Chinese are here, and also, the GCC, the Gulf Arabs, have started looking at this. So my hope is just that the governance of it and our government have like a really forward-facing vision for us so that we're able to retain some of this value.
And I think that's one of the interesting things about the mining sector in Africa. We're in a place where there's so much opportunity, so many foreigners are really trying to mine and extract resources, and more oftentimes than not, you see a number of countries not taking full advantage of it and they themselves being left behind. So really, Africa holds 30% of the global mineral reserves, but only receiving 5% of the funds that are required to really explore and mine these minerals. How can we improve this funding that actually comes in? Because in Nigeria, ASM mining is prevalent across the value chain, from gemstones to minerals to even metals like gold and so on. So it's something that we've seen that hasn't had a real support. And there's all the small scale mining. But as economists, we know that you have to have large mines to build accurate economies and adequate economies of scale to move it forward. So how can we attract more funding to some of these projects and move this number from 5% closer to what the actual mineral reserves are in these countries?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk numbers. So the IEA, as I said, let's discuss some of this projection. So between now and I think it's 2040 or 2050, we're going to need 40x more lithium, 25x more graphite, 20x nickel, and 20x cobalt, right? And the market size, when the IEA projected, what is the market size for energy transition metals and minerals, which has been doubling, is $320 billion in 2022. So the size of the prize is $320 billion. But what I had referenced before, what is the macroeconomic realities that Africa faces that then leads to this cost of capital? There's this recent report that did like a survey, and then it asked certain members of their pool of data, why is the cost of capital so high? And it's everything from, political risks, regulatory risk, and then there's the perceived risk that investors are just scared. The investors are risk averse. They do not want to invest in Africa. And the cost of capital, even in countries with similar risk profiles, when the credit rating agencies come, well, they're not even here. There's only one credit rating agency, and it's Cape Town. And if you go to Cape Town, you just realize that city is extremely foreign to many, not just like diversity-wise. Everything in Cape Town it's a complete outlier to any other city in Africa. But I digress. Because of all this, including that the credit rating agencies are not physically in Africa to understand our realities, it means that our cost of capital, even in countries that when the credit rating agencies they rank us the same, that cost becomes higher. So, for example, in South Africa, even though South Africa and Paraguay are ranked the same in terms of investment risk, Paraguay is only 15% higher cost of capital, and South Africa is 20% higher. So most countries that we rank, even after we've been ranked it's still 5% higher. And there's,
Mm,
you see, and even the ranking is, it's not accurate. And even after the inaccurate ranking, the investor adds another premium on top of that, a 5% premium after the unfair premium already that we've been
wow.
lumped with. So that's the biggest issue. Africa is facing a myriad of challenges, and some of them we can take, we can hold ourselves accountable. We have a bit of governance risk. This is a reality for most African nations. But it's not just
Mm-hmm,
Africa that is facing governance risk. Our friends in Latin America also, they're being ranked as risky as us. But
mm-hmm.
still, this continent we really need to examine how the risk perception is being, and that risk profile is leading to, as you said, we are not getting the investment required. And this is not just a symptom of critical minerals. It's a very popular number, right? And I'm sure you've heard of it many times, but we have,
Mm-hmm.
that number. We have 40% of the world's technical potential of renewable energy, right? And we only
Mm-hmm.
attract 2%. So all wind, this is the wind speed, solar radiation in Africa. 40% of the world is in Africa, sub-Saharan. And then because of that, they juxtapose against like a 2% investment in clean power technologies. So it's something that really needs to be examined. But I highly recommend looking at what UNECA, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, has been saying on this, and also President Adesina of AFDB. I think they're doing a really
Mm-hmm.
good job in marketing Africa as an investment destination.
Yeah. No, that's really good to hear, because one thing we always see is everyone speaks about Africa and all the risk Africa has, but there's still an appetite to invest here, given the potential income and also just the reward on investment that could be attained here. Africa is definitely the future. By 2050, one in every 6 or 7 individuals you meet will be African, which is really important that we build an adequate infrastructure to ensure that our citizens all have access to sustainable and reliable energy. And that's energy that currently 60% of Africans currently do not have. Maybe I can just get your thoughts on green hydrogen. There's been
Yeah.
talks around it, and it's something that we've heard and seen different permutations for. What are the real possibilities in getting green hydrogen going? I know countries like Namibia and some other South African countries have started making investments in it. Is it something that's viable, or is it a conversation that's still a few years away from materializing?
Yeah, no, so it's a good question. I've been working in hydrogen this is my 4th year. And yeah, not on the engineering side as my background shows, just on the kind of policy side. I don't have an engineering background, but this space, every year we learn literally the outlook of the hydrogen ecosystem. Every single year it changes. So, and hydrogen is just renewable energy, right? So you first have to generate renewable electricity from solar, wind, geothermal, what have you. Take that electricity, put it in an electrolyzer. It's just a machine. And you take desalinated water, and that electricity splits that water atom into, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. Then you have pure hydrogen. So that technology is there, it exists. The economics of it are not mature yet, but they will be between 2030 and 2050. And because Africa, as I said, has so much renewable energy technical potential, it follows that we have also hydrogen potential, because hydrogen potential starts with renewable energy potential. There are other ways of making hydrogen, like blue hydrogen, which is steam reformation, where you can get it from natural gas and steam. But this green hydrogen, really, the potential for green hydrogen only exists in countries that already have like a renewable energy potential. Either your country has geothermal, or you have a lot of wind, you have a lot of sun, and you have non-arable land that you can put the project in. But you have to understand, hydrogen's really just decarbonization to reduce emissions of some sort of industrial process because it's an industrial feedstock. So it's really about how to reduce emissions of like your industries, your manufacturing. And you can ask many African countries, is that a priority? Do we, are we reducing our emissions from the very few industries? It depends on the African country, but in the African country that does this level of manufacturing, then it depends, in Africa. Maybe it's South Africa, and South Africa has real goals around decarbonization of its metal steel processing plants. Then, of course, then they should do that. And recently, South Africa it's very high emissions. I think it's either the 12th most or 16th most emitting country recently by year.
wow.
Yeah, so it's emitting more than Spain, for example. So then it makes sense for South Africa to explore decarbonizing its industries. I mean, it's clearly the most industrialized country. But then for me, I think the opportunity for hydrogen is to channel this. We don't have an unlimited amount of renewable electricity to make hydrogen, because the difference between hydrogen and renewable energy is that, of course, we have uses for renewable electricity because it can be cheap. We can just use it to power our homes, our industries, full stop. Really, the only use of hydrogen, it is to reduce your emissions. And if you're a country that has 0.0001 of global emissions, then are you going to put your limited fiscal, bandwidth in your country? Are you going to build a hospital, or are you going to reduce your 0.001 emissions? Is Burkina Faso going to explore hydrogen or what? If you're exporting hydrogen, it can be a good commodity. So FDB is pioneering a lot of thoughts on this. It's saying, if Africa can export its renewable energy potential finally, so for example, we can put our renewable energy into, these green molecules called hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives, and then you export that, and then you can change that again. You can burn it and make electricity, or you can use it for some other industrial use. You can sell it to basically, Korea, Japan, Europe, the countries that want to buy hydrogen. But this can only really materialize if you sign an offtake agreement between Europe or Japan, Korea, that agrees to buy hydrogen from you and buy it in hard currency. So you're buying hydrogen as a high value commodity. And then, we can get some dollars, and then we can use it for many things that we can use that for. So that's the imperative. I don't want to say that climate is just like a foreign agenda. Africans do care about nature. In Kenya, especially, it's not just a foreign thing. The first African woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize was protecting our indigenous forests. So just to conclude, I want to say that if, on the flip side, if you're not exporting hydrogen and you've not gotten a good deal, you can also use hydrogen as a real opportunity on shipping or on creating green steel, or creating green fertilizer, because, most of our fertilizer is from fossil fuels, but you can get zero emissions fertilizer from hydrogen that you get from renewable electricity. And Kenya is exploring this. But this can only work if we can't be footing the bill for some of these technologies. And then Bloomberg, it came out with a hydrogen report recently, also last week. And this is the Bloomberg New Energy Finance report, which I just follow. And it already outlined that the many nations in the world that we are making a lot of plans to export hydrogen to Europe are already going to be disappointed by 2030, because everyone thinks that, for example, Africa will generate hydrogen and Europe will just be sitting there buying. No, Europe will be, be making their own hydrogen. Europe protects Europe first, and then they protect whatever is left. But I would just caution around jumping headfirst into the hydrogen ecosystem if we don't have real assurances around offtake or pricing or electrolyzer efficiencies, etc.
That makes sense. And I know we're spent on time, but I figure I need to get one more question out of you. And it's really just to understand and for you to share some success stories that the UN high level climate champions have done in Africa, and what lessons can we learn as a country, speaking from a Nigeria point of view?
Yeah, so I think our biggest success in the energy sector, other than, really supporting initiatives like the International Energy Agency's Clean Cooking in Africa summit that we were involved in, that catalyzed $2.2 billion in financing for clean cooking in Africa, and the work we've been doing in efficiency, and also the regional roundtables we held last year and we are holding again this year in ensuring climate finance flows into Africa. I want to mention two things that I personally was involved in. One is the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance, which was launched at COP26 in Glasgow, and most recently last year in Dubai at COP28, Nigeria joined as the 10th member country of the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance, and it really is led by Africans. And it's about countries in Africa discussing the hydrogen opportunities together and creating a common position and learning from each other before, speaking with external investors or stakeholders or other countries. So I would say that that platform was really before it was made, it didn't exist before. And since then, there's no one doing it. So I would say all these years later, it's one of the biggest successes we've had in the climate champions. And we're hoping to continue on that momentum in the lead up to COP29 in Azerbaijan, and then COP30 in Brazil next year, which will be a very, very big moment in climate because all our NDCs are going to be resubmitted with more ambition. And then the other one is where we helped, young people attending COPs, not just in Africa, but around the world, to have a pavilion. We came up with the idea. We got the money for it at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. We pushed for it. It was a reality. I don't know, Emeka, if you saw the youth pavilion in Egypt, it was a really big moment. And it received,
yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I came up with that idea, and we got money from CIF, Children Investment Fund Foundation, a lot of money to finance it. And we worked with the UNFCCC to give a decision in COP27 that every future COP will have a pavilion. And, young people in climate, they actually have a lot of, political power in the process for many reasons. But I would just stop there. I mean, these are the ones I think top of mind are really successful. And it doesn't mean that we aren't continuing to do more things in critical minerals, working with the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. At COP28, we launched a call to action. We want an African state-owned mining enterprise to engage with ARMA to advance responsible mining standards in Africa. So there's still more to do, and we're still engaged in the process. But I'll stop there. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jabri. Any final words that you would like to pass on to our audience? It's incredible the work that the UN climate champions have been up to, and we would just like to know if you have any final words you'd like to pass on to our audience. And most of our audience are young people in the African space looking to make impact. So over to you.
I'm really, passionate and emotional about young people in Africa. And I just want to say that if everyone wants to come into the climate space, it is, it's not like an easy thing, but it is possible. And every job is a climate job. So if you're in marketing, there's climate communication. If you're an engineer, you can go into renewable energy engineering. If you're a lawyer, like me, you can go into environmental law, climate law, renewable energy law. So climate is not a sector that you need to study. It is just, there's a climate dimension to any job. So even if you're an architect, I don't want you to think, oh no, I need to drop out and study like climate science. You can create, be part of like green buildings which is a big movement as well, and creating sustainable buildings and energy efficient buildings. So whatever you're doing right now, just continue at it and just keep going forward, keep floating and keep trying. Even for me, some might say that I'm in a good position career-wise, but I still get a lot of rejections, a lot of no's. If I apply for things, actually 90% is still no before you get that yes. So the real opportunity exists, when you get, or the lack opportunity is when lack meets preparedness. So that opportunity, when it reaches you, I just want you to be as prepared as possible. Stay engaged, and if you want to talk to me, you can just search me up on LinkedIn. I reply to all my messages. So I'll just stop there. But I just want to leave on a very hopeful note that it's possible to make it in climate. Anyone can do it, actually.
Thank you so much, Jabriel. This has been very, very insightful. And I think the audience will definitely reach out to you. So thank you for committing to replying to your messages on LinkedIn. So to our audience, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Connecting the Dots. We look forward to more and more interaction with you on our various social media platforms, from LinkedIn to Facebook to Instagram. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.